and that is hands down. I don't think anybody's been to 10 championships
No.
in a team sport. If that doesn't put you in an upper echelon of making an argument of being the greatest of all time, I don't know what does.
I am Garrett.
I am Brandon.
We are here to talk about GOATs.
So we're gonna talk about, discuss, debate the greatest of all time,
Barry Sanders,
with Damian Tomlinson.
You're listening to the Goat Herders podcast, where we herd the greatest of all time.
Welcome back to the Goat Herders podcast. I'm Brandon.
And I'm Garrett. And today we're going to be talking about an article that Brandon found about one of the possible GOATs of all time. GOATs of all time. One of the possible GOATs. Can't say all time.
The article came to me from my wife, actually. She's like, hey, look at this feed. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I read it and I was like, oh, that's kind of got some interesting things. We should probably talk about it. So most people who follow the NFL are pretty familiar with Erin Andrews. She's been around for a long time. She's I don't know what she does now for sure, but I know she was a sideline reporter for many, many years. And she was talking in an interview and was talking about Tom Brady and was saying that he basically just wants to not beat everybody up, but beat everybody up in a competitive way. Like, just wants to beat everybody. And she mentioned a kickball tournament with him and how intense he was and how shocked at how intense he was. And put this into a little bit of context. Her husband is a former NHL hockey player. So she understands intensity when it comes to a professional athlete. She spent her career around professional athletes. But in the article, she said some interesting things, and some interesting things were brought up about Brady, and we kind of wanted to talk about a few of those things real quick this morning.
The first one that we had was Michael Jordan versus Tom Brady. That was one thing she brought up in the article. And just looking at stats, if you look at their championships, you've got Michael Jordan went 6 for 6 on his national championships in the NBA, while Brady went 7 out of 10. So 10 times going to the Super Bowl, only winning 7 of them. Strictly looking at those two, you've got Michael Jordan, who was perfect in his runs in the playoff or in his championship runs, while Brady had 3 losses to his name there. One thing that we'll talk about a little bit later is that comparing players across sports becomes very difficult because of the different competitiveness, the different styles of the game, the different things that are needed to win in the games. Sometimes it's more reliant on one player versus not, and that kind of stuff. So to me, I always struggle to try and compare players across sports. Brady and MJ are both, in my opinion, the GOAT of their sports. So comparing them to each other is very difficult for me.
I think it's hard to compare them because, like you said, they are different sports. But one of the biggest things and one of the hardest arguments within any sport is who do they have around them and how much does that affect things and how much you can't really quantify leadership and how that can affect how different players play. So I think that's one of the challenges. A few additional stats to throw in there. They're just numbers, it's just data, but MJ had 4 MVPs in the regular season, whereas Brady only had 3. Again, that has a lot to do with who was playing at the time, whether there was a huge competition for that or not. But I would go out there and say that probably one of the most impressive things about Brady is the 10 Super Bowls. And that is, hands down, I don't think anybody's been to 10 championships in a team sport. If that doesn't put you in an upper echelon of making an argument of being the greatest of all time, I don't know what does. Even if he would be 50%, he still has won more Super Bowls than pretty much anybody else. or
more than most
more-
other teams too.
and
Like
more
right now,
championships than most anybody else.
yeah, he's got more than any other team right now too.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw out something here that if we want to jump to, is he the greatest of all time? Is he the GOAT of all sports? Here's what needs to happen. If he wants to really set himself up as the greatest of all times across all sports, he needs to win one more Super Bowl.
Why one more, Brandon?
Why one more? Because Bill Russell and the Celtics, I believe, won 8 championships. And I know that was a different time and a much smaller league, but you want to set yourself out as I'm right up there. Go win the same amount of championships as Bill Russell, as the Boston Celtics, and do it for 2 teams like he has. So you can bring back the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and do it again. I think you solidified, in my view, as the greatest of all time. What do you think about that?
As a former Michigan player, I remember a little bit of him playing for them and growing up. And I remember on draft day, you look at his draft day picture and he's just a scrawny dude. Like he is just a tiny guy that went 199th overall. It's crazy where he has come from to get to where he is now. And that trip that he's taken, that journey that he's gone on, in my book, he already is there. Granted, I don't know much about the NBA. I don't watch that much of the NBA. The 8 championships, like that's a good number to match. But he's proven himself after this one, because the conversation was always, oh, is it him or is it Bill Belichick? Like when he was with the Patriots, like he had the coaching, he had the team around him. So maybe he's not the GOAT because he's always just been in the perfect situation. But then he comes to Tampa Bay and does the same thing in his first year there. And so then that takes away that argument, is you can't argue that, oh, it's the team that he's around. So
this is what,
in my opinion, I think he's already proven it.
If you want to get a hands down from me, okay, not only does he need one more championship, but the Buccaneers need to trade him to the Browns. If he can bring
that would solidify it
to Cleveland.
They've got the tools there too right now. Like they made their playoff run. They beat the Steelers in the playoff last year. Granted, the Steelers were nothing last year, even though they went 11-0. They just had an easy schedule at the beginning, but that's beside the point. But
it's Cleveland.
I think the Jets right now, if we wanted to say a team that was the worst right now, I think you'd be putting them on the Jets and seeing what they could do. But
yeah, I think the thing is that we've seen throughout NFL history that one quarterback can really can do what Brady did. Can really make a team go from not so great to, wow, where did this come from? Whether it's Peyton Manning or even Brett Favre on the Vikings, and just kind of putting them on a whole nother level when he went there. You take one of the greatest of all times, Manning going to the Broncos, and yeah, it can put you over the ledge, even if you were really struggling to get to the top. And I think that's where Brady really sets himself apart. And I'd love to see him do it again, even though I've never been a big fan of him, just because probably out of envy.
yeah.
But
and the last point to him and his stats is, I think with Breeze retiring now, I think he'll take over the total yards record in 4 games next year. I think he's only 1,000 behind Breeze, and since Breeze is retiring, that'll be 4, maybe 5 games if he has a bad one.
Mm-hmm.
So the next point that we had then in that article that you talked about was, could Brady have made it in the NHL? What are your thoughts on that, Brandon?
Well, I think it's just kind of funny to think about it, because from a physical standpoint, you kind of already implied it, just kind of a scrawny guy, particularly when he first came into the league. But when I think about an NHL player, that competitiveness is really what will set them apart. So I could see him just absolutely being a guy who would just smash people up. People would fear him because he would just be so intense. I don't see him necessarily as the most skilled player, so maybe he'd be a defenseman who would kind of put everything on the line, and be willing to make the big hit or be willing to throw his body in front of a puck, and would definitely be willing to get in the face of his teammates and show them that they can do it, and if they don't, get on them for it. What are your thoughts about it?
I did not know that he was even thought of in hockey. I don't know. I'm trying to remember from the article if it was something that he had played before, or if it was just she was comparing it because of her husband.
Yeah, I just thought of it, and I thought it would be a fun thing to talk about.
Okay. So his size off the bat, like you were saying, like his competitive nature, et cetera, et cetera. I think he would have just gotten demolished. Like if he comes at some of those players, the players are gonna be like, who's this punk kid coming in here thinking he's all that? Like he'd get thrown down in like the first 2 games. He gets into 2 fights and then he's done for the season because they got his face broken or something. I could just see that not going well for him. Because you need the size. You're gonna lose some teeth. You're gonna get in a couple fights when you're in the NHL, and that's the nature of that sport, that's just what it is. And he's gone through his entire NFL career with hardly being sacked at all because he's always got a good line in front of him and the smartness, awareness, and knowing when to get rid of the ball. So he hardly ever got hit. Even now that he's muscled up a little bit, he's still not a big guy. Like
No.
I've never seen him in person, I guess, but he's still on the smaller end of players. So him in the NHL, I don't think that would have turned out well.
I think it's interesting to think about whether he would have been able to withstand that kind of like beating.
Yeah.
Because I mean, and the reality is that an NFL quarterback, you get hit a lot, but he's not a linebacker.
Right. You're not running into hits. You're not 2 collisions coming together. You're just absorbing the hit.
Yeah. The other thing about him is I don't know. I think hockey players, there's an argument you can make that they're some of the most athletic people on the face of the earth.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the amount of thing to be able to do what they do on ice is unbelievable.
Right.
And,
right. I can barely skate in circles.
And
not unless you can do it backwards.
Tom Brady has shown that he is great at being consistent and being able to really hone down the mechanics of a throw to never make a mistake and then have the mental acuity. But when it comes to being athletic, he's not far behind Peyton Manning on his ability to maneuver, and he does what he needs to do, but he's not an NHL player in that way.
Are you saying Peyton Manning was able to maneuver?
No.
Okay, because that's kind of what it sounded like, and I was like, he was like one of the most immobile quarterbacks.
Yeah, I'm saying Brady's not much far behind him. I mean,
as far as immobility, okay.
It's not Mahomes.
Gotcha.
It's not Cam Newton out there. It's not
right.
Michael Vick. Like it is the traditional.
I'm gonna sit in the pocket. I'm gonna throw a pass.
Yeah, 1970s quarterback. You're not running around.
Right.
Kind of hit everything on this. Do you have anything else you want to add on this conversation?
I just want to reemphasize his competitiveness. Like you talked about that kickball game. Just having that mentality of I don't care what we're playing, I'm gonna win. Like that's the mentality that gets you places in the world. As long as you go about it with the right attitude and you're not becoming like a big jerk from doing it, like you just have to have that edge to be able to push yourself to be the best at what you're doing. And that's where you're going to succeed in life, no matter what it is, whether it's sports, whether it's your career, whether it's school, whether it's whatever. Just having that drive to say, I'm going to be better than you. I'm going to be the best that I can be. That's huge. And that's what's taken Brady as far as it's taken him.
That's just a classic Garrett answer. It's like the opposite. I mean, I agree with points of that, but that's not the way I view the world as far as like, I'm more of like, I'm just going to do it better than everybody else. And then people will respect me for that. And then it'll be fine. I don't need to be competitive to do that.
Yeah.
But it's true. And I think the best thing about Brady is that he found the outlet where that works. Like if there's a place you need to have that edge, it's the NFL. Or in athletics, like having that edge is really going to put you in a position where you can push yourself to take care of your body, and also to have the leadership skills where people respect you so much that they will follow you.
And that's huge too.
And
That's huge too.
and honestly, that's one of the best places for that to be. This is making a connection to another one of the greatest of all times, Vince Lombardi. And multiple players of Vince Lombardi have been quoted as saying, thank goodness he found football, because if he was a leader of a world country, look out. And I think we could say the same thing about Brady. Thank goodness he found football, because if he was a leader of a world country, look out. He could have done some really bad things. Putting that
Or great things. I mean, you never know.
or great things.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on your perspective. I mean, Alexander the Great was a greatest of all time, except he also was a warmonger.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that is a skill that is, when you see it, and you can see it in some of the greatest, it's just really amazing. And that's something MJ had too. It's just this unbelievable intensity about himself.
I still haven't finished watching his documentary yet. I really need to do that. I've watched like 2 or 3 episodes, but it's been really good stuff to see.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot will be written about Brady as well.
Oh, for sure.
I think we're ready to wrap this up. I'm Brandon.
And I'm Garrett.
This is the Goat Herders Podcast.